Amara thought she was stepping onto the cruise of a lifetime, a chance to break free from the weight of her responsibilities, to feel alive again. At 53, she hadn't planned for adventure. Her life had been about others, family, work, sacrifice. But when David, a charming stranger she met online, promised her the getaway of her dreams, she let her guard down. He assured her everything would be taken care of, and for once, Amara thought she deserved a little joy. But what Amara didn't know was that David wasn't offering freedom. He was setting a trap. When they docked in Jamaica, what seemed like an innocent port of call quickly turned into something else entirely. Amara trusted him, following him down dark alleyways, unaware that he was leading her to a fate far worse than anything she could have imagined. What happened next? And how did this story end? You're about to find out. Welcome to Breaking Crime Stories. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and stay updated with daily true crime stories. Amara Santiago had spent the majority of her 53 years putting others first, her family, her children, even her friends. As a case manager in Jacksonville, Florida, she had dedicated her life to helping others, often sacrificing her own needs in the process. She was a woman defined by her responsibilities, caring for her 2 adult children, Maya and Isaiah, and supporting the clients she worked with in a demanding, emotionally draining job. Her marriage to her ex-husband had been a long, difficult journey of unmet needs, silent arguments, and years of trying to make it work for the sake of her family. By the time she retired early, she felt like she had nothing left for herself. The divorce, though a relief, left her feeling like a shell of the woman she once was. Amara had been the one to always give, always take care of others, always be the one to listen, to fix, to nurture. She'd given everything to her family, her time, her patience, and most of all, her heart. Her kids were her world, but now that they were grown, there was a void she couldn't ignore. She found herself at a crossroads, unsure of what was next, unsure of who she was if she wasn't playing the role of the caretaker. Her life had been lived on autopilot for so long, scheduling, organizing, managing, always pushing her own desires and dreams to the back burner. She thought about how long it had been since she'd felt a true sense of adventure, since she'd done something that wasn't just for someone else. Amara had always been someone who loved the idea of freedom, freedom from responsibility, freedom to just let go, even if only for a moment. She had long daydreamed about exploring new places, trying new things, but those dreams had always seemed out of reach. Years of practicality had built walls around her spontaneity. Her life had been ruled by schedules, by obligations. She had always played it safe, always kept things predictable, always stayed inside the lines. But now, with her kids out of the house and her career behind her, the walls felt stifling. The desire for something more, something outside of the role she had been playing for so long, began to simmer. There was a restlessness within her, a craving for something new, something that would make her feel alive again. But how? One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling aimlessly through her phone, Amara stumbled upon a Facebook group for Black people over 50. It was a space where women could share their experiences, support each other, and most importantly, live a little outside the constraints of their daily routines. Amara had never been one to dive into social media much, but something about this group caught her attention. She clicked the request button to join, not knowing it would be the first step toward changing everything. The group was filled with women sharing stories of resilience, laughter, struggles, and triumphs. It was a place where they could talk about everything from travel tips to life after 50, health struggles, and the challenges of balancing independence with family life. It was a space that felt unburdened by expectation. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt like she wasn't alone. She could breathe. She could think about herself without guilt. It was in this group that Amara first met David Chen. At first, he was just another face in the crowd. A 41-year-old self-proclaimed wellness coach, David had posted a few motivational quotes and pictures of himself on hiking trips and exotic beaches. His smile was infectious. His words, smooth and encouraging, stood out in a sea of daily posts. He spoke about personal growth, wellness, and living life to the fullest. And for the first time in years, Amara found herself reading his posts with interest. His comments were kind, respectful, and thoughtful. He asked questions about her life and took the time to genuinely listen to her responses. It wasn't just the usual small talk. There was a depth to his words that Amara hadn't expected. He seemed to see something in her that she hadn't seen in herself for a long time. "I believe everyone deserves a chance to feel alive," he had written one afternoon in the group chat. "And sometimes it takes just a little push to get there. Life's short. Live it while you can." Amara felt a tug in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but something in his words resonated with her. Maybe it was the way he seemed so confident in his own life, so assured that everyone could find their joy. Maybe it was the sense of freedom he exuded in every post. It was different from the heavy, responsibility-laden life she had grown accustomed to. She had been living in survival mode for so long, but David's words made her wonder if it was time to live for herself. After a few more messages back and forth, David began to ask her about her life, her interests, her passions, her dreams. He listened with a patience that felt genuine. He didn't rush her. He let her speak at her own pace. And in the process, she realized how much she had neglected her own desires over the years. She hadn't even known what she wanted anymore. For so long, it had been all about giving and nothing about receiving. He made her feel like maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim her joy, to take the reins of her own life, to break free from the patterns that had defined her existence. It was a conversation like no other, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. She began to look forward to his messages, the way he made her laugh, the way he encouraged her to think about possibilities she had closed off. David made her feel young again. He made her feel like there was more to life than what she had been doing, like there was an adventure waiting for her if only she would take the first step. Over the next 3 weeks, David's words never stopped. They were like a soft current gently pulling Amara in deeper and deeper. He praised her in ways she hadn't heard in years, things she didn't even think were worth mentioning. Her stretch marks, the marks of strength, he called them. Her laugh like music I didn't know I needed. He didn't just compliment her looks, he praised her soul, her kindness, the way she cared so much about others but never about herself. He was attentive, always checking in, asking how her day went, remembering every little thing she shared. He made her feel seen in a way that over time started to feel dangerous. It wasn't long before David dropped the idea of the cruise. "I'm planning a trip," he said almost casually, "Miami to Montego Bay. A cruise ship trip experience. You deserve it." He spoke about it like it was no big deal, but to Amara, it sounded like everything she had been yearning for. A break, a moment to breathe away from responsibilities, away from the constant pull of taking care of everyone else. At first, Amara hesitated. The idea of traveling with a man she had just met online seemed risky, even reckless. She'd been taught to be cautious, to guard herself from strangers, especially those who seemed too good to be true. David was charming, yes, but he was still a stranger, a face on a screen, a voice over the phone. The red flags flickered in her mind, but they were buried beneath the mounting desire for something different, something new. Her whole life had been about stability and responsibility, about putting others first, making sacrifices without question. She had spent years caring for her children, staying in a marriage that drained her, pouring her energy into work and relationships that never seemed to give back. Adventure, freedom, those were just fleeting thoughts she would entertain at night before falling asleep, dreams she never thought could come true. But David, with his smooth words and endless praise, made her feel like maybe she had forgotten how to live, how to feel alive. When he mentioned the cruise, Amara initially brushed it off. It sounded too good to be true, like something out of a romance novel that never really happened in real life. She could already hear the voices of her family, Maya, Isaiah, warning her. What if it's not safe? What if he's not who he says he is? But David kept pushing, in a way that didn't feel invasive, but almost like he was gently coaxing her back to life. He didn't push her to make a decision immediately. He let her think about it, letting the idea settle into her mind. Then he said the words that completely shifted everything. "I'll cover 70% of the expenses. You just bring your joy. Amara's heart skipped a beat. The offer was tempting, yes, but it wasn't just the money that caught her attention. It was the way he made her feel, like she didn't have to worry about the details, the responsibilities that always weighed on her. It was as if he was giving her permission, not just to travel, but to live, to step outside the box she had built around herself. Just bring your joy. The phrase echoed in her mind, striking a chord deep inside her. How long it had been since she'd done anything for herself? How long had she been caught in the cycle of obligation and duty? For once, she didn't have to be the responsible one, the steady one. She could be free. For just a moment, she could be Amara. The weight of her life didn't have to follow her across the ocean. All she had to do was bring her joy. In that moment, everything shifted. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a longing she hadn't recognized until now, a craving for something she hadn't realized she needed so desperately. She hadn't felt joy in years, not real joy, the kind that made you feel light, unburdened, like the world had opened up for you and you could breathe again. David had awakened something in her she thought she had lost, her sense of adventure, her desire to feel alive. This trip, this escape, wasn't just about the destination, it was about the chance to reclaim a piece of herself that had been buried under years of responsibility. She realized then that the real reason she was saying yes wasn't about the cruise. It wasn't about David either. It was about her need for something that was just hers, something she could hold on to that didn't require her to give or sacrifice. She'd been living for others for so long, putting their needs first, that she had forgotten what it was like to want something purely for herself. And here, finally, was the chance to do just that. So she let go of her doubts. Amara booked the cruise. She packed her suitcase with a mixture of excitement and hesitation, carefully folding each outfit, imagining herself in the different settings, the sun setting over the ocean, the warm breeze, the quiet moments she had only dreamed of. She had always been the practical one, the one who never indulged in luxuries or fleeting desires. But now, as she zipped up her suitcase, she couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation building inside her, growing with every piece of clothing she packed. This wasn't just a trip. This was a chance to reclaim herself, to remember what it felt like to be more than just mom or worker. Her children, Maya and Isaiah, were naturally skeptical. It wasn't just the idea of her going on a trip with someone she hardly knew. It was the fact that they had seen her give everything she had to others for so long. And now here she was, choosing to step out of the safety zone they had all built around her. They had never seen her like this, so willing to take a risk, to go after something that wasn't planned, wasn't certain. Maya, her eldest, was the first to voice her concern. "Mom, you don't really know this guy," she said, her voice laced with worry. Her words weren't just caution, they were rooted in love and protectiveness. Maya had seen her mother go through the pain of a failed marriage, had watched her make sacrifices for everyone around her, leaving little room for herself. She couldn't help but wonder, was this another form of escape, or was Amara setting herself up for something she might regret? Isaiah, always the protective one, wasn't as outspoken, but the concern in his eyes said everything. He had grown up seeing his mother give so much of herself, always putting their needs above her own, always doing what was expected. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about this whole situation didn't sit right with him. "Be careful, Ma," he said, his voice soft but firm, the weight of years of watching her care for everyone else hanging behind his words. Amara understood their concerns. She knew that they feared for her, that they didn't want her to fall into the same pattern of disappointment and hurt that had defined so many of her past choices. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that this wasn't about trusting Marcus. This wasn't about taking a leap of faith in someone else. This was about trusting herself for the first time in years. It was about rediscovering a part of herself that had been buried under years of responsibility, sacrifice, and the weight of everyone else's expectations. She looked at Maya and Isaiah, her heart aching with love for them, but also with a quiet certainty. "Let me have this one thing," she told them, a smile tugging at her lips. It was a simple sentence, but it carried so much more weight than just a casual reassurance. It was a declaration, one that she hadn't allowed herself to make in a long time. This wasn't just about a cruise or a man or an adventure. This was about her. She needed this. Her life had been devoted to them, to her family, to work, to obligations that always came first. She had never given herself the permission to feel joy, to feel excitement without guilt. The years of living for others had slowly chipped away at the spark in her, at the woman she once was before everything was about taking care of everyone else. This trip, this moment, was her way of surviving. It wasn't about abandoning her family or being reckless. It was about finding a piece of herself that had been lost for far too long. "I need this, Maya. I need this, Isaiah. For me," she added, her voice steady now, a quiet resolve behind the words. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a step toward regaining something that had been missing. Her spirit had been worn thin by years of sacrifice, and for once she wanted to feel like she mattered too. This was her time, just for her. Maya and Isaiah exchanged looks. They didn't fully understand, but they saw the change in her. They saw the way she was stepping into something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. And though they still worried, they knew they couldn't hold her back. Amara needed this, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to let her have it.
So, with little more than a few conversations and a couple of assurances, Amara found herself boarding the cruise ship on August 8th, 2017. She stood at the port in Miami, looking up at the massive ship, feeling a flutter of nerves in her stomach. She had new braids, a new dress she bought just for the trip, and an even newer sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. It was as if this moment, this decision had somehow reset her. She wasn't the mother, the caretaker, the worker. She was just Amara. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was doing something just for her. The ship itself felt like a floating city, its decks bustling with passengers from all walks of life, each one there for their own reasons, their own escapes. Amara felt small in the sea of people, but not in a bad way. She felt free, unencumbered. She wasn't defined by the usual weight of responsibility, and for the first time in years, she didn't have to answer to anyone. David, ever the attentive companion, stayed close to her, guiding her around, sharing the beauty of the ocean with her like a secret they both shared. He made her feel cherished, seen, adored. August 10th, 2017. The sun hung low in the sky as the ship docked in Montego Bay, its massive shadow casting over the port as tourists swarmed to the pier. Amara stepped off the ship with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years, her sandals warm against the concrete, the ocean breeze kissing her skin. The excitement of being in a new place, the smell of salt water in the air made her feel alive, alive in a way that was new, raw, and intoxicating. She wasn't just here for the cruise, she was here to rediscover herself. David, walking beside her, was still the charming man she had gotten to know online. Smooth, engaging, always a step ahead. His eyes glistened as he pointed toward the crowd of tourists, his voice almost too casual as he suggested, "There's a great spot for lunch, I know, not too far from here. It's off the beaten path. You'll love it. Real food." Amara hesitated. There was something about his tone, something off in the way he said it that made a small shiver run down her spine. She had heard the warning bells in her head when he first suggested it, but she dismissed them. What harm could there be? She didn't want to spoil the fun, the excitement of the day. She wasn't about to ruin the mood she had finally found. She had come this far. Why not trust him now? "Sure," she said, offering him a smile. "Let's go." They walked away from the crowds, veering down a side street. The noise from the port faded behind them, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional shout from a street vendor. The path grew quieter, narrower. Amara's footsteps felt heavier on the uneven pavement, the shadows deepening as they ventured further. She couldn't help but notice the absence of other tourists, the empty storefronts, and the dust that seemed to settle in every corner. The air was thick with the unfamiliar, and the uneasy feeling she had tried to dismiss earlier crept up again. Still, she kept walking.
She told herself it was just nerves. She told herself she was being silly. David led her deeper into the heart of the city, taking turns she hadn't expected. The alleys got narrower, the space between buildings tighter. The vibrant energy of the city, once so welcoming, was now distant. They turned a corner, and there it was, a dark alleyway tucked between crumbling buildings. It wasn't the place she had imagined when David had promised her real food, but she followed him anyway. "I thought you said it was close," Amara said, trying to keep the unease from her voice. But David just flashed her a smile, a reassuring look that only made her more uncertain. "It's just around the corner," he said, voice smooth, but Amara could feel the edge in his tone now. She wasn't sure if it was him or her own nerves. They walked to the end of the alley, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls, and then, as if on cue, two men appeared from the shadows. They were standing by a metal door, tall with expressions that didn't match the casual atmosphere David had tried to paint. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. David didn't flinch. He didn't break stride. He gave a small nod to one of the men. Amara's heart skipped. Something was wrong. She felt the blood rush from her face, the weight of reality crashing down. This wasn't a casual lunch spot. This wasn't a detour to real food. Her thoughts screamed at her to turn around, to run, but she couldn't move. Her legs were locked, her heart pounding in her chest. David, with that same practiced smile, turned to her. "Wait here," he said, before he walked toward the men without a second glance. Amara's heart was racing as the reality of her situation set in. Her mind struggled to process what was happening, but there was no denying it any longer. The man she had trusted, the man she thought she had found a connection with, was now the one causing her deepest fear. She cried out to him, her voice cracking as she begged for mercy, begged for him to stop, but his expression never changed. There was no softness, no remorse in his eyes. He just stared at her, his face impassive, like he had done this before and it meant nothing to him. His hand brushed her tear-soaked cheek as though to remind her of how easily he could break her. "Please," Amara pleaded, her voice trembling, "I trusted you." But David only gave her a cold smile, a smile that made the pit in her stomach grow heavier. "You think you're the first?" he said, his voice low, almost detached. "You think you're the only one who needed a break from her life?" He paused, as if savoring the moment. "You're just another one. Just another woman who thought she could escape. I've done this before. I've done it to women just like you. Women who wanted to live, wanted to feel something outside of the weight they carry every day. They came to me for a taste of freedom, just like you." Amara's mind raced, but her body was already numb with fear. She felt the grip of helplessness tighten around her chest, suffocating her. He wasn't just a predator. He was a professional. He knew exactly how to target women like her, women who had been giving for too long, women who had been living for others. He knew the cracks in their souls, the places where loneliness and exhaustion had carved deep marks, and he used that against them. Her body jerked in shock as the blindfold was tied tightly around her eyes, blocking out the little light left in the alley. She struggled, trying to scream, but the fear and the drugs coursing through her made everything feel like it was happening in slow motion. She could hear the faint murmur of voices as she was led away, her limbs weak and unsteady. The grip on her arm tightened, pulling her forward as her footsteps faltered. They were moving her, and she had no idea where they were going. The blindfold was torn off Amara's face with an abrupt, almost careless movement. Her eyes blinked in the harsh light, trying to focus on the dark room around her. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by the drugs, by fear. As her vision cleared, she began to take in her surroundings, each new detail making the terror in her chest grow tighter. The space was vast, like a warehouse with high, darkened ceilings that seemed to swallow the faint light flickering from overhead bulbs. The floor beneath her was cold concrete, stained in places with dark patches she didn't want to examine too closely. The walls were bare, broken in places, as if the building itself had been forgotten by time. There were no windows, no escape. It felt like a place where people came to be hidden, left out of sight and forgotten. The smell of industrial bleach mixed with something deeper, something metallic and unsettling. She wasn't alone. Her eyes quickly scanned the room and her heart dropped as she saw the other women. They were scattered across the floor, some lying down, some sitting, all with their heads lowered or eyes glazed over, their bodies limp as if they had long since given up. They were bound in the same way as Amara, hands behind their backs, ropes cutting into their wrists, their bodies left in uncomfortable positions. Some were still awake, their faces drawn, pale, showing the kind of exhaustion only true terror could produce. Others, like the woman closest to Amara, had clearly passed out from the drugs, their bodies too weak to resist any longer. The sound of a door slamming shut echoed behind her, and Amara jumped, her body stiffening. The two men who had brought her here walked toward the center of the room, their heavy boots clicking against the concrete floor. They didn't acknowledge her or the other women. Their presence felt like a reminder that here they controlled everything. Amara's throat tightened as the enormity of her situation crashed down on her. She wasn't just in some random hideout. This place wasn't just a detour. It was a holding pen, a warehouse, a sick operation where women were treated like livestock, their lives measured by what they could offer. As she tried to steady her breath, she saw a small group of women in the far corner, sitting in a dazed silence, looking almost lifeless, like the ones who had been here too long to remember what freedom even felt like. One woman, her face drawn with fatigue, met Amara's gaze. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too, an understanding. Amara's breath caught as she realized what was happening here. She wasn't just in the hands of traffickers. This wasn't about being sold for labor or worse. It was about her body, about what they were going to take. There were no words for it, but she felt the truth flood through her like a dark wave. This was organ harvesting. She had heard rumors, read reports about it happening in faraway places, but now it was real. She was standing in the middle of a criminal operation where women were turned into products, human flesh for sale to the highest bidder. The reality hit her like a punch to the gut. These women, some of them older than her, some much younger, had been brought here just like her, lured by the same promises of freedom, of escape. And now they were here, waiting for whatever came next, their futures no longer their own. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, but the gag that had been shoved into her mouth earlier still made it impossible. The ropes felt tighter with every breath, and her limbs were already beginning to ache. She tried to move, to stand, but the weakness in her body stopped her. Amara couldn't even hold her own weight, let alone fight back. The fear clawed at her insides, but there was no way out. A door opened abruptly, and Amara's heart skipped a beat as two men stepped into the room, their heavy boots echoing on the cold concrete floor. They were dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, their faces obscured by shadows. Without a word, they began to move through the room, examining the women as if they were nothing more than merchandise. One man walked up to the older woman who had been stripped of her kidney and pointed to her with a blank expression. He checked something off on a clipboard, his movements swift, mechanical. Then, without a glance toward anyone else, he turned and left the room. The other man followed him, his gaze lingering over the rest of the women before he exited as well. No words of comfort, no expressions of remorse, just cold, methodical movements. It took Amara a moment to process what had just happened. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization slowly crept in. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. She wasn't here to be sold. She wasn't here for forced labor or worse. They weren't after her for what they could make her do. They were here for what they could take from her. They were taking her organs. Her stomach churned as her thoughts raced. The pieces clicked together. The women in the room, their condition, the absence of any care, the way the men had come in and treated them like inventory, pointing and choosing who would be used next. This was an underground organ ring. They weren't after them for sex or labor, number harvesting their bodies, selling their organs to the highest bidder. Kidneys, livers, hearts, who knew what else? She had heard about it, read about it in the news, stories that seemed too horrendous to be true. But now she was living it. She was a part of it. Amara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of movement from one of the other women. A young woman, her face tear-streaked and swollen, shifted slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room, taking in the sight of Amara and the other women, the brokenness in their eyes matching her own. They were all in this together, and yet they were all alone. Amara wanted to scream, to shout, to ask for help, but the words wouldn't come. The drugs, the fear, the shock, all of it combined, making it feel like her mind was drowning in a haze. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, but she forced herself to focus, to stay alert. She couldn't give up, not yet. The silence in the room was broken by another man walking in, his steps slow, measured. He had a clipboard in hand, ticking off names and noting things down. His eyes flicked over the women one by one, his gaze cold and calculating. Amara's heart sank as he stopped in front of her, his eyes flicking over her with the same detached curiosity. His finger tapped the clipboard as he scribbled something down. Amara's pulse raced. What was he writing? Was her name on that list? Was she next? But before she could make sense of anything, the man turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing in the distance. Amara's body shook with fear, her mind racing to find any escape, any hope. She had to survive this. She couldn't let them take her without a fight. She strained against the ropes binding her wrists, trying to move, trying to free herself, but the pain in her limbs was overwhelming. She could feel the blood circulation being cut off, her fingers numb. The room spun around her as she tried to focus, to keep herself awake. She couldn't let herself be weak, couldn't let herself be another number in this nightmare. And then she heard it, a faint whisper from across the room. Another woman, her voice trembling with fear. "We're just numbers here, just pieces of flesh to them." Amara turned her head slowly, trying to find the source of the voice. The woman's eyes met hers, and there was something in her expression, a knowing. She wasn't just a victim here. She had been here long enough to understand the brutal truth of this place. Amara swallowed hard, her throat dry, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens to us?" she managed to ask. The woman closed her eyes, her head hanging low. "They take what they need, and then they throw us away." The words hit Amara like a cold slap. This wasn't a place for rescue. There was no hope of being saved by the authorities or anyone else. This was where women came to disappear, to be used up and discarded when they had nothing left to give. She had to get out. She had to survive. And yet, as she looked around at the others, the truth settled in her chest like a stone. She wasn't sure how long she could keep fighting. She wasn't sure if there was even a way out. But Amara knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let them take everything from her without a struggle. They knew exactly how much to sedate her without putting her completely under. She felt everything. Every movement, every cut, every inch of her body that was sliced open. She could hear the men's voices in the background, the clink of metal tools, but it all felt distant, like she was watching it happen to someone else. Her skin stretched in ways it wasn't meant to. Her breath caught in her throat as they worked. The pressure in her abdomen was unbearable as she realized what they were doing. She could feel them take her kidney, her own body betraying her as the sharp, burning sensation flooded her senses. She wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but the drugs made her feel like her voice was swallowed whole. She could hear one of the men say something, his voice muffled, his words unintelligible through the haze of pain. She was awake for all of it. The blood, the pressure, the tools, and the knowledge that there was no escaping it. She was just a body on a table, nothing more. She could feel the tears, though she didn't know if they were from the pain or the helplessness. When it was over, they didn't care to cover her wounds or to ease her pain. They simply removed her from the table and tossed her back into the room with the other women, her body weak, her mind foggy. She landed hard against the cold concrete, her limbs still bound, her skin slick with sweat and blood. Amara didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg for her life. Her body, broken and in shock, couldn't respond. She simply stared up at the ceiling, silent, her eyes unfocused, trying to process the pain and the betrayal. Her body felt like a foreign thing now, empty, hollow, used. And yet she knew one thing for certain. She had survived. For now. The hours turned into days. Amara lost track of time. She felt herself growing weaker, both physically and emotionally. But still, she didn't give up. There was something inside her, a flicker of defiance, of life that refused to let go. She couldn't afford to. She had to find a way out. It was during one of those long, agonizing moments of trying to hold on to consciousness when she first saw the nurse. Rosa, Amara could barely remember her name through the fog, was standing near the door, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Her presence felt like a lifeline, like a shadow of hope in a place so devoid of kindness. Amara could feel the weight of her gaze, though her body felt too heavy to move, too numb to speak. But Rosa was different from the men. She wasn't part of the operation. She didn't belong to the shadows that ruled this hell. The nurse's eyes were soft, even kind, in a place where kindness had no room to breathe. Rosa took a step forward, hesitating for just a moment before she knelt by Amara's side. Amara's heart stuttered in her chest, unsure of whether this moment was real, unsure if she was still trapped in a nightmare. But as Rosa gently placed a folded piece of paper in Amara's trembling hands, she knew this was her only chance. The paper was small, the edges crumpled as if it had been hurriedly written in a moment of fear. The writing was shaky, the words slanted and uneven. Amara's fingers shook as she unfolded it, her eyes barely able to make out the blurry ink. It was in Spanish. Her understanding of the language was limited, but she could catch enough to understand the urgency of it. I saw you in my dreams. Someone told me to help you. Stay awake by nightfall. They will come for you. The words were cryptic, unsettling in their vagueness, but they were also her only hope. The nurse, Rosa, had left no further explanation. There was no time for questions, no time to understand why or how. Amara could feel the weight of the words pressing against her chest, the pulse of fear mixed with something else, a glimmer of hope, faint but real. Stay awake by nightfall, the message said. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of it. She wasn't sure who they were. Was it the men who ran this place, the ones who had done this to her, or was it someone else? Was Rosa truly trying to help her? The paper was all she had. It was the only thing that made her believe there was a way out of this. She had to stay awake. She had to trust that Rosa, whoever she was leading her towards something better, something that could free her from this nightmare. As the hours stretched on, Amara fought with everything she had. The nurse's warning echoed in her mind, her only guide through the suffocating darkness of this place. Stay awake by nightfall. Every minute felt like an eternity. Amara could hear the distant hum of the building, the faint sounds of footsteps outside the room, the rustling of the other women who lay in their own misery. But none of that mattered. She focused only on one thing, the nurse's words and the promise of freedom. She refused to close her eyes. Even when the pain threatened to overpower her, even when her body screamed for rest, she held on. The pain was intense, but she knew that if she let herself succumb to the sleep, to the numbness, she might never wake up again. She might never have the chance to fight, to escape, to make it out of this place alive. Later that night, after hours of battling the pain, the exhaustion, and the confusion, Amara felt her body slipping. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Her mind, foggy and battered by the trauma, started to give way to the need for sleep. But she couldn't afford to let go. She couldn't let herself fall into the abyss of unconsciousness. The fear of what would happen if she did, that she might never wake up, never escape, kept her fighting, kept her awake. Then, through the haze of her thoughts, she felt it, a touch. It was light at first, barely a pressure on her arm, but it sent a ripple of recognition through her weakened body. The touch was gentle, reassuring, but there was urgency in it. Amara blinked, struggling to bring her eyes into focus. It was Rosa. The nurse had returned. The sound of her voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it cut through the heavy silence of the room. "Sígueme," she said, her voice soft but urgent. Amara's heart jolted. The words were foreign, but she recognized the tone. Rosa was asking her to follow, to move, to leave the place she had been trapped in for what felt like forever. Amara didn't understand Spanish very well, but she knew what those words meant. Follow me. Amara didn't question. There was no time for questions, no time for doubts. She didn't need to understand fully. She needed to trust. She had nothing left to lose. Her body was broken, her spirit battered, but her will to survive hadn't been completely crushed. Rosa had been her one lifeline in this nightmare, the one person who had shown her kindness when there had been none. If there was even a chance that following her could lead to freedom, Amara would take it. With a strength she didn't know she still had, Amara nodded weakly. She felt her legs give out slightly as she tried to stand, but Rosa was there, steadying her. Her hand on Amara's arm was firm, guiding her through the darkness of the warehouse. It was strange how in that moment the fear that had ruled her for so long seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of hope. For the first time since she'd been brought here, she felt like she wasn't just another woman waiting to be discarded. They moved quickly, quietly. Every step felt like a challenge, every movement a fight against the weakness that had consumed her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. As they reached the back door, Rosa paused, turning to look at Amara with a wordless glance. Amara saw something in her eyes, then something that spoke of danger, of urgency. They weren't safe yet, but Rosa's next words were all that Amara needed to hear. "He's waiting," she said simply, before pushing the door open and guiding Amara into the night. It was a different world outside. The cool night air hit Amara's face, sharp and fresh after the stale, suffocating atmosphere of the warehouse. The world beyond these walls was vast, open, and Amara realized how long it had been since she had been outside, since she had felt free. The sounds of the night, distant car engines, the rustle of leaves, seemed so much louder now, as if they had crossed into a different reality. Rosa led Amara to a dark corner of the alleyway where a man was standing, waiting. His presence was almost invisible at first, blending into the shadows, but when he moved, his silhouette became clear. He was tall, solid, his face hidden under a baseball cap, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in his stance. Amara had no time to wonder who he was or how he fit into the plan. Rosa's hand on her arm gave a final reassuring squeeze. She had trusted this man, and in that moment, Amara had to trust him too. "This is Diego," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara didn't understand the full weight of the introduction, but the man, Diego, seemed to recognize her confusion. He didn't speak at first. He simply nodded, his face grim but kind as he stepped toward her, his hand reaching out to steady her as she wavered. Without a word, Diego took Amara's arm, leading her away from the alley. Her legs shook beneath her, the overwhelming exhaustion making it harder to keep her balance, but his grip was strong and steady, guiding her through the dark streets. As they moved, Amara felt a strange sense of relief, but also the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't know who this man was or what he intended to do, but Rosa trusted him, and that was enough for Amara. They moved through the quiet streets, passing by closed shops and empty cars. The air was thick with the smell of salt water from the distant ocean, the faint hum of the city night pressing in on her. Amara could hear the soft crunch of gravel under their feet as they walked. Every step felt like it could be their last, every corner a potential danger. But the only thing she could focus on was the fact that she was moving away from the nightmare, away from the cold, sterile rooms and the men who had treated her like nothing more than an object. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, unmarked van parked in an isolated lot, hidden behind a row of buildings. The engine was running, and the door was open, waiting for them. Diego helped Amara into the van, and she collapsed onto the seat, too weak to protest. He and Rosa climbed in, and as the door slammed shut, Amara felt the weight of everything she had endured pressing down on her. She was leaving the hell she had been trapped in, but she wasn't free yet. Not completely. The van started, its engine rumbling in the silence, and they drove off into the night. Amara's head fell back against the seat, her eyes fluttering closed. But she didn't sleep. She couldn't. She had no idea where this journey would take her, or who she would become when it was over. But for the first time in days, she felt like she had a chance. She had been given a lifeline, and she wasn't going to waste it. She was going to make it out. When Amara was finally brought back to the U.S., she was nothing more than a shell of the woman who had boarded that cruise ship months earlier. The journey from the border to the hospital had been a blur of pain, exhaustion, and disorientation. Her body, weakened from the surgery, from the trauma, barely responded to the care given to her as she was rushed into emergency care. The doctors and nurses, seeing the extent of her condition, moved with quiet urgency, trying to stabilize her as quickly as possible. Her body was covered in bruises, her skin pale and clammy, every inch of her telling the story of the horror she had survived. The missing kidney was just the beginning. Her body was exhausted, barely able to function after weeks of torture and neglect. As she was hooked up to IVs and monitors, Amara felt the cold sting of reality settling over her. She was safe now. She was home, but she wasn't whole. Her children, Isaiah and Maya, arrived at the hospital shortly after. Isaiah, who had been in constant contact with the FBI, had not left her side for long, working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the man who had done this to her would never hurt anyone again. But now the reality of seeing his mother lying in that hospital bed, unconscious and battered, hit him like a freight train. Maya, her face streaked with tears, held her mother's hand, whispering words Amara couldn't hear, but would later remember in the quiet moments when she was strong enough to listen. The doctors told them the prognosis. Amara had survived, but her road to recovery would be long, painful, and uncertain. The physical damage to her body was severe, but it was the emotional toll that they couldn't predict. She was alive, but at what cost? The doctors warned Isaiah and Maya that she might never fully recover, not just from the physical wounds, but from the psychological scars left by the ordeal. Days passed. Amara drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she awoke, her mind tried to make sense of what had happened to her, but the memories were blurry, fragmented. The pain, the fear, the confusion, it was all still too much to process. Isaiah sat by her bedside each night, watching her, wishing he could take away the suffering that lingered in her eyes. Maya, on the other side of the bed, held Amara's hand during the day, whispering softly to her mother, as if hoping her words would bring some comfort, some sense of peace. Maya didn't know how to make this better, but she would be there every step of the way for as long as it took. The hospital staff did everything they could, trying to stabilize her physical health first, but it was clear to them that her emotional healing would be just as important. They encouraged Isaiah and Maya to talk to her, to let her know that she was loved, that she wasn't alone. But they knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The trauma she had endured would take time to surface, and when it did, it would take everything for Amara to face it. As the days passed, Amara began to stir more often, though her body felt like a foreign thing to her. Each time she opened her eyes, she was met with the comforting faces of her children, but the fear in her chest still clung to her, tight and suffocating. She could still feel the coldness of the metal table, the cold hands that had taken from her. She could still hear David's voice in her head, the words that had haunted her since that night in Jamaica. But there was something else, too. It wasn't just the drugs or the trauma that kept Amara alive. It was hope. It was the belief that there was someone out there who cared enough to help her, even if it was just a small gesture in the middle of a nightmare. Amara wasn't fully healed, not by a long shot, but in that moment she felt a small flicker of something that had been absent for too long, her will to fight. She wasn't going to let this define her. She wasn't going to let it take her completely. There was still a long road ahead, but Amara was determined to walk it, and with Isaiah and Maya by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The man who had nearly destroyed Amara's life, who had torn away the trust she had so desperately tried to rebuild, returned to the U.S. without so much as a second thought. The cruise ship that had once been the backdrop for their shared moments of joy and laughter was now a distant memory. For him, it had been just another chapter in his twisted journey, a mission completed, a woman used, and now he was on to the next one. But Amara's family wasn't going to let him get away with it. Isaiah, her son, a quiet but relentless officer with the Orlando Police Department, couldn't sit idly by. He knew something had to be done. He knew this man would strike again if no one stopped him. Amara had told him everything she could remember, every detail, every fragment of conversation, every piece of his identity that she had pieced together from the haze of pain and terror. The tattoos on his arms, the places he frequented, the words he used. Isaiah listened closely, quietly building the case, determined to track down the man who had violated his mother in the worst way possible. But it wasn't just about Amara. Isaiah knew that there were others out there, women who had been lured by the same promises, the same lies. It was only a matter of time before David found another woman like Amara, vulnerable and trusting, desperate for something he knew how to exploit. Isaiah began his search. He dug through social media, knowing that was where David would be hiding, under a new name, with a new identity, finding new women to manipulate. It didn't take long before Isaiah found it. Under a different alias, David was still active, still reaching out to women, still searching for his next target. The chilling realization that David had been grooming women like this for years hit Isaiah hard. Amara wasn't the first, and if he didn't act quickly, she wouldn't be the last. Working with the FBI, Isaiah used his resources to create a fake profile, a decoy designed to draw Marcus in. They knew exactly how Marcus operated, and they understood how to play his game. With the team's expertise and Isaiah's quiet determination, they set the trap, building a profile that seemed too perfect, too irresistible for someone like David. He was no stranger to these online games. He had done it for years, using women like Amara as pawns in his twisted scheme. But this time, he was the one being played. As Isaiah watched from the shadows as the conversations continued and David grew more interested, the tension in his chest tightened. He had to remain calm. He had to stay focused. He knew this was the only shot he had to catch David in the act. The FBI team had set everything up, secure locations, surveillance, evidence collection. But it all depended on one thing, David's willingness to meet in person. And when the message came, when David suggested meeting face to face, Isaiah knew the time had come. The meeting was arranged, the bait had been set, and on October 2017, David showed up. He was eager, almost too eager. He thought he was meeting a woman, someone new to target, someone who would fall for his charm and lies. But when he arrived at the designated location, he wasn't greeted by the woman he had been talking to online. Instead, he was met by the FBI, by a team ready to take him down. The arrest was swift, precise, and inevitable. David didn't stand a chance. As the agents moved in, Amara's worst nightmare was finally being brought to light. The man who had manipulated, exploited, and abused her was finally caught. He had nowhere to run. He had nowhere to hide. The life he had built on deception was unraveling before him. But it wasn't just David's capture that was important. It was what came next. As the investigation continued, the full extent of David's crimes was uncovered. He had done this to 7 women before Amara. 7. He had lured them with the same promises of escape, of freedom, and then stolen their lives, one organ at a time. He had used them for his gain, leaving them broken and discarded when they no longer served his purpose. The FBI uncovered a network that spanned across states, a network where women like Amara were seen as nothing more than pieces to be harvested, sold, and disposed of. The shock and horror of it all hit Isaiah harder than he expected. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. Marcus had been part of something much larger, much more dangerous. But the arrest, the trial, the charges, they were a start. Justice was being served, and Isaiah wouldn't rest until it was finished.
David was sentenced. He would never be able to hurt another woman again. He was locked away for the rest of his life. But for Isaiah, the damage had already been done.
His mother had survived, but the road to recovery for Amara was just beginning. The trial, the investigation, the arrest, none of it could take away the pain of what she had endured. But Isaiah knew this. He had protected his mother. He had taken action when it mattered. He had brought the man to justice. And for Amara, that was enough to begin healing. In the end, Amara was not just a survivor. She was a woman who had been given a second chance thanks to her son's relentless pursuit of justice and to the strength of her own will to survive. But for Isaiah, it was more than that. It was a promise kept, a promise to never let the monster who would hurt his mother slip through the cracks again. The investigation into David Chen's twisted operation didn't end with his arrest. Federal investigators quickly uncovered a chilling pattern: 7 missing black women over the span of 5 years. Women who had been lured by David's charm, his promises of adventure and freedom, only to vanish without a trace. The stories of these women, their faces now haunting the investigators' reports, were pieces of a puzzle that had been slowly coming together. Each woman's disappearance marked a new chapter in David's calculated campaign of manipulation. 2 of those women were never found. Their fates remained a mystery, their families left in agony, unable to bury their loved ones. One of them was discovered later, buried behind a nightclub in Kingston, her life taken in a place far removed from home, where she had once believed she could be free. In the midst of this unraveling horror, Rosa, the nurse who had helped Maura, came forward. From the safety of her own home, she testified via Zoom, her voice shaking as she recounted the moments she had witnessed in that dark warehouse. She had watched Amara's suffering, watched the others, and had made the brave decision to act. The note she had slipped into Amara's hands, the cryptic message urging her to stay awake and follow, was entered into evidence during the trial. It was a piece of the puzzle, a lifeline Amara had held onto that had made her survival possible. David Chen was sentenced to 120 years in prison for his crimes, a sentence that would ensure he would never be able to harm another woman again. As the courtroom echoed with the finality of the verdict, Amara sat in silence, the weight of it all heavy on her shoulders. Justice had been served, but it couldn't erase what she had gone through, what the other women had gone through. It was a victory, yes, but one that came at an immeasurable cost. In the aftermath, Amara found herself at a crossroads. She had survived, yes, but she wasn't the same woman who had boarded that cruise ship. Her life had been shattered, and she knew that the path to healing was not something that could be walked alone. She needed to help others, women who had found themselves in the same position she had, women who had trusted the wrong person and paid the price for it. That was when Amara founded the Safe Escape Foundation. The mission of the foundation was simple but profound: to help older women verify the people they were meeting online, to offer resources for those recovering from trauma, and to raise awareness of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of seemingly innocent interactions. Amara knew firsthand how important it was to trust the right people, to have the resources to recognize red flags, and to know when something didn't feel right. She wanted to make sure that other women didn't have to suffer the way she had. Through the Safe Escape Foundation, Amara worked tirelessly to educate, to support, and to empower. She spoke out, shared her story, and made sure that no one else would feel as isolated as she had. But Amara kept a personal reminder of her journey, something that no one could take from her. On the wall of her bedroom, framed in an elegant wooden frame, was the note Rosa had given her. The words were simple, but they had saved her life. Sígame, follow me. It wasn't just a message from a nurse. It was the moment Amara decided to fight, to hold on, and to survive. The Safe Escape Foundation grew in the years that followed, becoming a beacon of hope for many women who had been victims of exploitation and abuse. Amara's work wasn't just about raising awareness, it was about making a difference, offering a hand to women who needed it most and helping them reclaim their lives, their freedom. She became an advocate, a voice for those who had been silenced, and through her work, countless lives were saved. But Amara's story and the stories of the women David had hurt weren't the end of the story. They were just part of a larger, darker truth. Thousands of women disappear every year, some for love, some for freedom, some because they trusted the wrong man. Amara lived to tell her story, but how many don't? Like, subscribe, and in the comments answer this. Could this happen to someone you know?